Was it wishful thinking to think that there would be a Telluride edition in 2020?
I think was maybe an optimistic hope that they would have a festival. And Telluride really did plan. They added an extra day, and the thinking was that with an extra day they could space out screenings and maybe accommodate maybe not a full crowd in a regular year, but still a good number of festival goers. But it looks like just given the situation in the States, they are not taking the chance, and the festival is now off the table for 2020.
I was thinking that Telluride would be a really slimmed down version this year. I don't know what the venue setup is over there. I had a feeling that there's maybe 4 or 5 different venues, more or less like Sundance, where you're showing films in gymnasiums and non-theatrical, non-theater establishments. And I was actually quite looking forward to what a really slimmed down version would look like. A festival that would not necessarily be dependent on films from Cannes, let's say, and be perhaps more proactive in getting those 8 or 10 major film titles that normally would go to Venice and then TIFF afterwards. So they did announce that they would be identifying the films that they were looking to program. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting choice. I mean, when Ken announced that earlier this year that they wouldn't have a festival, but they would announce their selection, there was a very clear reason. I mean, having that Ken laurel on a film helps its commercial potential for international sales, and almost every film goer knows that you see that logo in the trailer or on the poster. It gets a lot of tickets sold. It gets a lot of people in the door, in the seats. Whether that's the same for Telluride, I don't know. My feeling is that it's probably has less of an impact. But I mean, let's face it. We know there's still going to be some kind of an award season, and whatever film are selected. Will benefit from having maybe that extra laurel.
Yeah. What the interesting thing with Telluride, of course, is like it can almost be like dead on arrival, not dead on arrival, but dead after its initial play. Like Telluride clouds tend to parse the seas or to parse films, and meaning that their second or third showing is like, we already know whether it's part of the race or not. And that's what's interesting this year is regardless if they identify the films, those 8 or 10 films, the speculation really increases tenfold because they'll have identified those Oscar potential films, but the thunder that they usually generate will occur at these other film festivals, Venice and TIFF. So I think it's going to be a really peculiar moment when they do decide to unveil their mini program.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think for general people, the thing with Telluride is that it is very much a festival that's for awards season writers, for entertainment people. It doesn't have that broad impact the way TIFF does. Like TIFF, it's covered in every media outlet every single year. Telluride is still its own smaller, more close-knit, more very industry rubbing elbows festival. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes this year, if they're just going to list a bunch of titles, if those title selections will travel beyond the sort of smaller nucleus that this festival is important for.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering out loud whether major trade outlets. So when South by was canceled, when Tribeca was canceled, some of those titles were being offered. Obviously, it was a no man's land. It was challenging times, and and people that were getting ready to market films had no idea how to market those films. And so I'm curious to see whether LA or New York-based film critics for those major trades are going to be able to access those films well before TIFF or Venice, and just stay put in the US, because most likely they won't be able to travel to Italy or Canada. So I'm wondering out loud whether those outlets are going to have the opportunity to review those films.
I think that's a great question. That's a great thought. I think, we know that was announced earlier that New York and Venice and TIFF are all working together. My guess is Telluride will have their list, but I still think we'll have the digital screenings for critics wherever they are, but they're going to be tied to some pretty well thought out embargoes that I think will more align with the festivals that will be happening, such as Toronto or New York.
Mm-hmm. We would not be talking about this film, I believe, if it weren't for First Reformed. This week, Focus Features got behind the card counter, which is great news for a film that was sort of like broken into half during the COVID situation. Paul Schrader was near completion of this smallish indie with a great cast, and had the opportunity to complete lensing last weekend. So what did you think about the deal? It's a rather significant statement, I think, on Focus's part.
Yeah, well, I have two thoughts. One is that Focus is really having quite a year. I mean, they have this film, they picked up Cajillionaire. We talked in the last couple episodes back about Blue Bayou, which is now on their shelf as well. So they have been making some really, really interesting plays over 2020. And I think for Paul Schrader's film in particular, this is very promising news. I mean, if Focus is picking it up, it means they probably feel it has, I think, more commercial potential than I would have assumed for this film. Paul Schrader, particularly over his last few films, has just done his own thing, really his own thing, or done some experimental things, really pushed boundaries, tested the audience. And with Focus coming in on this film, though, it says, to me, it says that there's something here that's potentially bigger than anything he's done in the past little while. And when I say bigger, I mean in a commercial context.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that, I remember how resilient he was, how the COVID situation was really off-putting for him. Obviously, he was close to the finish line. And I remember he put some things out there in the Twitter sphere that he'd rather almost die and lay his life down for this film. I'm glad he's still with us, and I'm glad that he wasn't too bullheaded on back in March. But what it says is that, between March and June, they probably advanced the editing to a point where they had some kind of a working copy, and that probably it was put out there to all the Indian distributors, including the Neons and maybe A24, who distributed First Reformed. And so for Focus to go and grab world rights, I believe, for this project is rather more than encouraging. It says that we have something here that is worth considering for all sorts of things, including the big film festival circuit and award season type things. I mean, that's the gut reaction I have. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the project, who's involved and what's it about?
Sure, but before I do that, I just want to add that we can't forget that the Cannes market was last month, and the card counter was in the market. I believe they did some virtual presentations with the cast and Paul Schrader, and I assume they probably showed some footage too. So I think Hanway Films was selling it, so they made a very a very strong push for the film. I remember seeing some stuff on Twitter as the presentation was happening. I think Hanway dropped the first look at the film and the poster as well online. So they were very aggressive in getting this film noticed. Um, and as for the film itself, the details that we do know is that the big star attraction is Oscar
That's
Isaac.
right.
Yeah. We have Ty Sheridan in the film as well, Tiffany Haddish, Willem Dafoe. And it's a film about a young man who seeks revenge. It's a gambler and a young man who seek revenge on a mutual enemy. It's set against the backdrop of the world of gambling. And it sounds thrilling to me. I mean, it's everything about that is right up my alley.
There's a lot of misfires in this subgenre of I'm thinking a lot of the rounder type films of the 90s. It got quite boring very quickly, but I get a sense that there's going to be a lot of that Paul Schrader DNA, and then, like, characters that are rich, and I'm looking forward to this film.
Yeah, and I believe I should mention, there's actually also there's a backdrop of PTSD and war as well. So it's a vengeance film. It's about war. It's about gambling. It's Paul Schrader taking some very interesting subject matter that would be films on their own and pulling them into something that's going to be, if nothing else, memorable.
Great. Well, moving along, we have a film project that was announced back in late 2017, and now it's been like put out there on a pedestal. So Netflix are getting into the Linklater business. We're moving back to rotoscope, and the formerly untitled 1969 moon landing film that we sort of had snippets of 3 years back. Well, now it's being fully fledged. We got a lot more intel this week. So Apollo 10 and a half, a space age adventure, is a sort of wink to potentially Linklater's past. And yeah, so what is your reaction to this project, which we were sort of like following in little itsy bitsy details over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's Linklater. He zigs and he zags, which makes him a filmmaker that's always interesting to watch. I mean, his last film was Where'd You Go, Bernadette, which no one knows where that film went. It kind of came and then disappeared. But this seems like something that's much more in the wheelhouse that we've known him to be in. It's a return to waking life in a Scanner Darkly, those early films where he was using his clout as a filmmaker on the rise to really take some risks. And It's kind of exciting to see him dip back in that direction. So what we do know about this film is that it's going to have a pretty interesting cast. Jack Black is going to be in it with Zachary Levi and Josh Wiggins. They're going to be sort of the lead trio. And to me, it really sounds like a return to the Boyhood era, the Boyhood sort of feel. This is a story about a young boy in the 1969 Apollo mission. And the perspective will be, from what I understand, part of the film will be taking place in space, like during the mission, and then there will be a more homebound story on planet Earth. So yeah, I mean, it's Linklater, and when he's doing stuff like this is when I'm most interested in what he's up to.
Space was such a big deal back then, and I would say until the mid '80s, and then I guess they had so many missions afterwards, putting out satellites and having all these competing nations that it feels as if it was just a given or a dime a dozen. I was thinking about how the technology might be better served here, or might better service one portion of the story, specifically anything that takes place in space. I'm kind of hoping to see um, um, the rotoscope technology not overtake all elements of the film. I'm sort of hoping that the space elements, um, or anything that's imaginary or dreamlike for the younger his younger protagonists. I'm hoping that that visual DNA gets pronounced there, but I don't know. How did you feel about his use of it with the two items that you named?
I think they were used well in both. For Waking Life, it really suited the sort of, the philosophical, dreamy stream of consciousness sort of vibe of that narrative.
Mhm.
A Scanner Darkly, again, like that was a more of a science fiction-ish tale, and again, it worked well there. I think he has a really good feel about how to use this style and that sort of animation, um, and how to use it not just as like a stylistic technique, but how to use it to get like emotional resonance as well. So
Mhm.
I maybe have less concerns about that. I think certainly he's proven himself twice already to know how to use this to really strong effect. And the idea of a sort of coming of age tale against the space race and that kind of thing with I mean, we've seen countless films where it's like very period specific with every detail right. And I think the chance here to sort of smudge those lines a bit is kind
No,
of cool.
that's well put. That's a um, really good comment on your part. So production on this concluded in March of this year in Austin, and he'll probably be in a longer post production period with the technology. I think another significant thing to mention about this project is that it's Netflix dollars once again
Hmm.
that are backing the project. Netflix is not they're not afraid of backing anything that's animation. I think that's really refreshing, and especially with concerns to world cinema. And I'm thinking about the Cannes Critics Week film, and they made another pickup this year. So it's quite encouraging that they're not afraid to go in more adult animation territory and really get behind a project that should cost quite a significant bit. Moving on, speaking of Cannes, we have a seasoned filmmaker who found success last year with The Invisible Life. The longer title was cut up by, I believe it was Netflix or Amazon. Actually, it was Amazon that put it out this year. So Karim Ainouz is actually going to go back to King Henry VIII days, and more specifically, he's going to be looking at the sixth wife of Henry VIII in a British production called The Queen's Gambit. So this is a filmmaker that's been around for a while. He made Madame Sada, I think it was in the late 80s, I want to say, or early 90s. And, kind of found his way and had a lot of homegrown projects. And Invisible Life, sort of like did a lot for his career. And so it's quite interesting to see this Brazilian filmmaker, established Brazilian filmmaker, go into a production that is going to go into, set pieces, costume pieces, and go into a character that has a stake in what we're going through these days. So yeah, what can we? So yeah, perhaps we can go into the screenwriters. So, are you familiar with Killing Eve and the screenwriter duo?
I know who I've heard of them and their work, but I'm one of the few who has not tuned in yet to Killing Eve. So, um, but just to pick up a bit, we should mention also that um, Invisible Life was Ainouz's last film, and it was also Brazil's Oscar selection. So he's in a pretty hot moment right now. But to your point, the sort of pivot to make a period piece is very interesting. Um,
I had I had to dig into so his sixth wife. She has a name. Her name is Catherine Parr, and she died. She died a little bit after having gone through childbirth. And just reading up on the character, a very strong-minded, strong-willed wife who also had a creative spirit and sort of had a life of her own, if you will, if you want to call it that. She died, I think it's in her 30s. So I was thinking a lot about strong female protagonist roles of late, more specifically Lady Macbeth. And so, yeah, there's going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of competition for whoever gets to play this figure. Did you watch the Tudors?
no, but I'm a big The Crown person, so no, the Tudors I just never caught up with.
So it harkens back to this period, and what the producers said is that they're going to be less interested in the historical folklore or that confetti, and more getting into the character's headspace. And I think Invisible Life did that for his paired female protagonists. So yeah, it's a really fun time to be this filmmaker. So Queen's Gambit, they're looking at a 2011 shoot, which, as we're in the
2021, not
business,
2011.
2000, yeah, 2021. And so something like this will take at least, there's going to be a lot of work put into it. And so it wouldn't be that crazy to potentially be talking about this as a Cannes competition title in 2021, seeing that the Brits are always welcome, and this filmmaker won in the In Certain Regard category. Moving on, I don't know about you viewers, but I think Kevin and I like to parse through a lot of the news that's out there. There's always these tidbits of information. And I think there's a lot of financing structures that I'm always like looking at names, and some filmmakers, they might be 5-6 films in, and it's not necessarily easier for them to get funding. But in France, they have a different system altogether. And so this week it was announced that the CNC Receipts, which is a funding body in France, well, they actually give money to auteurs with clout. And so this Quentin, known as the other Quentin, has quite a strong filmography, a strong presence, and he was at the top of the list. So maybe you can just go through Quentin Dupieux's films. Like, what do you think about him in general? And this goes back way back to Rubber. How do you perceive this filmmaker?
He's an interesting filmmaker. His early work is not necessarily my taste. It's just he's very, very offbeat, where it has a very distinct sense of twisted humor. So Rubber, Wrong, and Wrong Cops in particular, those sort of three films really put him on the map. He's been at festivals around the world. But it seems his career is taking a bit of a different turn. Deerskin was really, really well received in the director's fortnight 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And on the horizon, he has Mandibles, um, which is led by Adele Exarchopoulos,
Yeah.
of Blue is the Warmest Color fame. It should be said that Deerskin was led by, his name is escaping me, uh,
Oscar winner.
Oscar winner from The Artist.
OSS series.
Yes, that guy.
Um,
I forget his name is escaping me. But
oh,
this is all to say that he's working with bigger actors are coming to his films, and so his newest film, the one that's getting some financing here, um, it's going to be interesting to see if this is another step towards. It is another step actually towards um, a bigger cast and possibly a bigger audience. I mean, he has Alain Chabat leading this one.
mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly he's attracting much. There's more onlookers, certainly in the French star system, that are being attracted to his worlds, his universes, and his distinct. I want to call it bleak or noir humor. And when you have funding bodies that back that, that means that it's no longer just ideas that are scribbled on a napkin. Now he's like developing fuller universes. Mandible was tipped for Cannes, might be going to Venice, and has a December play date in France. And so his project, and he really is one of those filmmakers that is almost like Ozon, I want to say, that is really like, I think he makes a film every less than 2 years. So Incroyable, mais vrai, which I believe the translation would be unbelievable but true, has Alain Chabat, who's much more a comedian, an actor who plays comedic roles. But you have Leah Drucker, who is she plays a little bit of everything. She was in Custody recently. Great dramatic performance. You have the Benoit Maggie Mill, who I think not all his films find themselves in the U.S., but he's a notable face in The Piano Teacher. And Agnès Dumoustier, she had a really big year in 2014 with Bird People and The New Girlfriend, that Ozon film. She's been around for a little while. So essentially, the script really sounds disturbing. It sounds very Austrian-like. I'll just go through it really quickly. It centers on Alain and Marie as they both move to the banlieue house of their dreams, but the real estate agent did not warn them that whatever's in the basement might change their life. So I think there's going to be some subversive qualities to this film, and it's certainly something that I think we can be excited for in 2021.
And it's Jean Dujardin. That's the guy
Thank
who
you.
was in Deerskin. I had to say it because I would have felt awful not mentioning it. But yeah, again, I have to agree with you. The direction Dupieux is taking right now is pretty cool, and he's doing it while retaining the thing that makes him special as a filmmaker. I think all these films have his voice, and it's just really cool to see him sort of forge this path. As you say, much like Ozon, making films frequently, kind of switching things up a bit, but retaining the thing that makes him special.
Yeah, you definitely feel that he's moving away from like a heavily experimental, I don't care phase, perhaps, and into something that is more concerned about box office receipts and stuff like that, but still remaining true to his madcap world. In 2016, the blacklist was put out. Among the top items, we had The Post. A little bit further down on that list, we had a project called Palmer, which, as we know how blacklist screenplays end up, the successful ones end up panning out, is that talent gets attached, production teams get assembled, and then we can compare unfairly to the top projects and the lower projects. And this week, Apple got behind a film that sort of was under the radar a little bit. So let's delve into this project. It's called Palmer. It's top line by an entertainer and directed by somebody who's an actor who directed a lot more docu-features than narrative features. So yeah, let's talk about this this Palmer project.
Yeah, so we're talking about Palmer. Justin Timberlake is going to lead the way on this one. Juno Temple and June Squibb are in the supporting roles. And like you say, this one's flown under the radar a bit. Production on the film was last October. But even then, there wasn't much buzz around it. You know, to be honest, I kind of this film was like totally off my radar. I haven't really thought about it. But the story itself seems like one that's pretty wide-reaching. It's about a former college phenomenon who goes to jail and then returns to his hometown to try and get his life back on track. So it seems like a narrative we've seen a few times. But what makes this? But clearly, Apple sees something in this for their service, and you know they've been going really hard on acquisitions. You know, in the past, throughout all of 2020, they've got Scorsese's film Killers of the Flower Moon, Jake Gyllenhaal's upcoming Snowblind. They just released Tom Hanks' Greyhound. They've got Will Smith's Emancipation, and these are all films that on the face of them speak to a huge audience. You know, Apple's a global service, and I think this is one that they probably feel will do that too.
Yeah, you get a sense that this road to redemption, broken home narrative sort of like ticks off a lot of boxes. And Alicia Wainwright appears to be somebody, I'm not really familiar with her work, but on the TV series Sphere, she seems to be an up-and-coming talent. And yeah, what's encouraging about Apple is that they're getting into the acquisitions game, but they're also going into development game as well. So all these titles that you mentioned, they're getting behind product that's either complete and ready to be at a potential major film festival. Palmer could actually, this deal could actually be something that would push it to be maybe it's already identified as a title that might be at TIFF for all we know, because production did end in late 2019. So it certainly is complete, and maybe they're just adding score to it or whatnot. So yeah, Fisher Stevens appears to have something that that is attracted the higher powers at Apple, and that's who knows what this project might look like.
And you make a great point. I mean, you know, Apple's been busy picking up these films and putting a lot of stuff in development. And I think in a normal year, we probably already would have heard about what their award season plans are. But at the very least, we know there are two to three big festivals coming up. We have Venice, Toronto, New York. And you're right, this could be in play. It feels like something that would be in Toronto for sure. And we can't forget that Sofia Coppola's new film is just sitting, waiting in the wings to go somewhere. So it'll be interesting to see what the second half of 2020 looks like for Apple.
Yeah, they're certainly in the starting gate and getting a feel and sense of what the landscape is in different phases of production. Finally, we go into like a $1 million project. Netflix, they're just having a great run. COVID has been really popular. I mean, it's helped them increase their subscription rates. The same could be said probably for Mubi and the Criterion Channel. I mean, there's a lot of great product out there, and they're getting behind a project based on the success of a smaller actioneer film. I think you might have a bit more to say about this project than I do. So The Gray Men, please give us the lowdown on what this project's about, and some of the players that are coming on board, notably the two A-listers.
So the Gray Man is it's being set up as a big franchise play for Netflix. They have Anthony and Joe Russo, the big time Marvel guys, and they have Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans slated to star in this assassin action thriller espionage kind of tale. But the point of interest for me is that because I'm a giant dork who keeps track of these things in my brain, this was actually a project that James Gray and Brad Pitt were attached to maybe 8 to 10 years ago. This was something that was, I believe, at Paramount. And it was going to be a really, really big gear shift for James Gray. It was going to be a chance for him to do spectacle and action sequences. He did an interview with the Playlist circa 2012 where he talked about shooting the car chase in We Own the Night, and how that was a great sequence, but it was something he had to do on a very limited budget. And he talked about how the Gray Man would allow him to sort of expand his palette in that sense. I think he sort of worked that out with Ad Astra in a sense, in terms of doing spectacle. And for whatever reason, the Gray Man just never happened. It moved on. For a while, it was at Sony with Charlize Theron eyeing the lead role, but now it's in Netflix's hands, and it's going to be a big blockbuster for them.
So the Russo brothers, they put out Extraction with Chris Hemsworth. We reviewed it on IONCINEMA.com. I'm the type that would have normally dismissed that film. We didn't totally dismiss it. And it played extremely well. I think it was just great timing. I think it was like really at the onset of this pandemic, and it just had an instant audience, captive audience waiting there. And when I was reading about this project, I was thinking a lot about the Bourne franchise. And if you're able to get behind a series of films, I'm trying to think of Netflix. I don't think they've ever had a trilogy or a four-part or any of those kinds of films. So this is a huge price tag for this project, but I think they're thinking of the long game and seeing, the potential to spawn an entire series out of this. And it was mentioned in the article, like there's remnants of the Bond films as well. So I could see why the price tag is at that amount.
Yeah, it's going to be a big one for them. And you're right, Netflix doesn't really have... they're in a world now where they're competing with Disney, which has like about 50 billion franchises that they can pluck from, and all these streaming services from the studios, they have built-in franchises. Netflix really doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great point. And I think the other interesting thing for me is this is actually Ryan Gosling's second major studio film he signed on for. Just a few weeks ago, he signed up to play Wolfman for Universal. So it's interesting to see him move away from the sort of more auteur-driven films that he's been doing, and sort of take some really high-profile blockbuster stuff.
Yeah, it is an interesting direction for the actor. And if you look at his filmography, it's been highly selective. I mean, working with the Cian France or the Chazelle or Nicholas Refn, like highly, very, very picky. I guess he's just at a point where he's just gonna flex different muscles in a literal and physical sense, and just take it to the bank. And maybe he'll come back to the dark side once again. But I guess he's becoming. Studios are considering him for roles that traditionally we wouldn't really consider.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, he has done the sort of mainstream comedy thing a couple times, and I mean so he's not totally alien
Yeah.
to the mainstream world, but um, it is an interesting choice. But maybe he's doing like what Robert Pattinson's doing with Tenet. You know, he makes Tenet, and then he does like 5 more auteur art house films. So if that's what Gosling's up to, then that's cool, man. That's great. If he can do these 2 big pictures and get a bunch of smaller stuff funded, then that's great.
Well, time will tell if he does such an equation, and we welcome it. Before we sign off, worth mentioning that next week we have the Giornate degli Autori. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly, but it's essentially the director's fortnight equivalent for the Venice Film Festival. So we can expect about just under a dozen titles for this parallel competition or non-comp selection in Venice. So I'm looking forward to seeing just a whole bunch of new names and sort of like the film festival circuit being rescued. So I'm Eric Lavallée. I'm editor-in-chief and site owner for IONCINEMA.com, and this is
Kevin Jagernauth, contributing writer for the playlist.
And together we are IndieSponge.